Adams here with the third program in Series 3 of the Sewing Connection. Back for another obvious use for a parka we talked about last time. When the threat of rain is present, that anorak is just the protection you'll need to keep you dry. Fabric choices in today's market are fabulous, but they pretty much fall into two different groups. One of them might be the waterproof ones, and that means if they're waterproof, they have to be completely coated so that nothing can come through. So I have one here that might be, I wouldn't promise it, and another one that's pretty good. It's not completely waterproof, but they're kind of representative of that group. Now, to be completely waterproof, that means nothing comes through whatsoever. They better be like the old slicker, or they better be some vinyl-coated fabrics that you can also find on the market. These are two more commonly found because you can't find those everywhere. These two that are found frequently, and you might not even think of them for rainwear, but they do a beautiful job of it. This is a faux leather, and this one is the same in suede, synthetic leathers and suedes, and they really do quite well. This one especially, it doesn't seem to allow a whole lot to penetrate. It is the leather surface, and so it's a pretty good choice. Now, when you use either of these types of fabrics, the suedes or the leathers, the temptation is to use also a leather needle to sew with them, and that's not a good idea because you're going to lessen the waterproof qualities if you do that. What a leather needle does is actually slice a little cut every time it goes in and out of the surface of that fabric. You don't want that because every little cut that you make there is where water is going to leak through if you're really in a downpour. So I would advise instead that you just use a really fine needle for these, as fine as you can, probably about a number 70, 10, or somewhere between there and an 80, something kind of fine. And stretch needles also work out probably a little bit better than other types in that they go in and out, they penetrate more easily. But keep that needle fine so it doesn't make big holes, so the rain doesn't come through. If you're using the suedes, I would also think about which direction the nap goes, because I wear it a lot as a raincoat, and I never have become wet underneath as I've been wearing it. What I did, though, before I cut this out is put some under the faucet, just put the edge of it under the faucet to see if it would make any difference. And I found it did. If I had the nap going up, which I would prefer because it's a prettier color, it's deeper, it's richer when the nap goes up, but I found that it caught the water a little bit. So I turned it the other way to see what would happen if the nap would go down. And just like water running off a duck's back, the water was running off this. Now I suspect if you were in a heavy enough downpour, it would eventually soak through. In fact, I'm quite sure it would. But these are pretty waterproof unless you get into the actual vinyl coated ones. So this is one group of them. And then another group of them, the more common ones that you find everywhere, are these that are just very closely woven. And because the closeness of the weave, this means that water can't penetrate very easily. It has to rain a lot before it's going to come through. And these might be, a lot of them are nylons, they might be polyesters. Look for the new microfibers, which is actually a polyester, but those new microfibers, what is so nice about them is that the denier is so fine that they can weave real closely together. All the yarns in it are very close and it's almost impenetrable. They make some very nice rainwear though in these. They're brand new, so go out looking for them. This one is a nylon, and if you are wondering why didn't she press that, it looks a little wrinkly, you can press it all day and it's not going to look any better than this because they are kind of wrinkly. That's fine. This is just very casual, very informal rainwear. And so it works out beautifully for the purpose, and we don't care if it wrinkles. That way you feel comfortable when you're just in casual clothes. I'd probably wear it over jeans or something equally at home. And it just has that nice casual look. Now what else this one had, and I like this for the whole rain story, I like this big, big fit. It said on the pattern, it warned me, it said very loose fitting. Believe it when they say that, when they describe what it is. And also, if you aren't too sure of what they mean by very loose fitting, actually measure it. And you'll probably find that, oh goodness, that measures a whole lot more inches across the bust or the hips or whatever than I am, as this certainly does. I could gain at least 100 pounds or more and it would still fit me. But it was meant to be that way. It is my size pattern. So it's kind of a nice thing just for casual rainwear. What I also would like to have in rainwear sometimes is an extra layer of fabric there. You know how so often on raincoats you do have that extra layer across the back, the front, and the purpose of that is not just design, it's not just to look smashing and very British and so on. It really is to keep you a little bit drier because the rain has to penetrate more layers to get down to you. I would like to have done it with this. I didn't plan in advance, and this is kind of important. Think about that as you're getting into it. And when I got this all cut out, this is what I had left. And I don't see anything there that's going to go over my shoulders that's going to keep me any drier. Therefore, I had to forget that idea. No extra layer can I have on my shoulders. But I did put 2 layers in the hood. I think this pattern only called for 1 layer in the hood, and I did put 2 layers here. So there is a seam all around, and there is a hood back here. And instead of the 1 layer just hemmed under the edge. So that's a good idea, but that's about all the extra fabric I have. If you want to have something going over your shoulders, you're going to have to buy perhaps an extra ½ yard, enough that you can cut it out. What I did as a substitute, because I didn't have the extra for the shoulder protection, is to cut a lining for it. I've shown you before on another series how to cut a lining, but I'll just refresh your memory very briefly. So here it is lined, and I did this for 2 purposes. Usually if it's rainy, it's also a little bit chilly, and so I wanted to keep a little bit warmer. And this nylon, the closely woven nylon, can feel a little clammy. It certainly has no warmth in it, even though it's a nice windbreaker. It has no warmth in it. So I did line this with an interlock, a cotton knit. And this one, I just took the pattern pieces that I have down here. Here's the front, and here's the back. And remember that to cut a lining, the lining is the very same as the outer layer, except for the facings. So it's the whole original pattern that I have used for that lining, minus the facings, but plus 2 seam allowances. So what that would mean when you cut this out, if you want to add a lining to your raincoat or jacket, is make a mark here on the pattern exactly where the edge of the facing is. And then you want to add to that, because right now the edges would just butt together, the lining fabric and the facing. You have to have some seams there. So you would add 2 seams to it. That means actually measure and get 1 1/4 inches going there. 5/8 times, or plus 5/8 is 1 1/4 inches. So you would need that. You'd need to mark it like this and decide exactly where it is you want to cut, which is 1 1/4 inches from the line where the 2 meet. So here would actually be my cutting line right here. I would add that 1 1/4 inches. The same would be true over here on the front as the front facing is put down on the pattern. I would want right where the edge of this front facing comes, plus I would want those 2 seam allowances, or 1 1/4 inches beyond that. And by doing that, you can't go wrong. The lining's going to fit in there perfectly, and everything will work out just fine. Now, because this lining seemed a little bulky in it, and I wanted to keep it as soft as possible and as unbulky in the crucial places like your waist. Who wants any bulk around their waist? So right there, even though I had the lining cut all in one, I did stitch some of the outside fabric to it, some of the nylon taffeta to it, and then I cut away the extra knit behind that so that it wouldn't be so bulky. Also, anytime you want to have a drawstring going through the hood or the waistline like this, it can pull out so easily that it's a good idea, and especially on children's clothes, always do this. Get the cord balanced after you have it pulled through here so that everything's just right, so that it comes out equally far on both sides. And then right in the very center, take a few stitches on machine, by hand, whatever, so that it can never be pulled out. And as I said, especially this is good in children's clothing, or you will be continually putting it back in, since it pulls out so easily by little hands who love to play with it. So, this is what I did for this one. Now, if something else I did on this is I wanted to make this a little easier on myself. And I only, by the way, as I can feel in here, I only lined the body of it. I didn't line the sleeves because I really didn't want them any heavier. Just the body was sufficient. But this pattern had a cuff on it. I measured that cuff, which was about 2 inches, and I added that to the length of the sleeve. So whatever the sleeve length was, I added that cuff, because you have to have some cuff displacement there. And then I was going to have a casing coming up here so that elastic would go inside. So I also had to add not only the cuff displacement, but also another 1.25 inches probably to fold up inside and be stitched down. So think of that in advance if you're going to change the pattern at all in ways like that, so that you can get that taken care of. Then some other pattern adjustments that you might make, or other pattern changes that you might make, are these. I have back here this green raincoat. I've added epaulettes to it. Now that's not too big a deal. That's something you can very easily do just by measuring the width of the shoulders and cut it maybe a couple of inches wide, and it just gives kind of a nice military look, as so much rainwear has, so many raincoats do. So that's one little simple thing that you might add to it. Another one is illustrated on this blouse, but also on the commercial raincoat that's underneath it, so let me show you this. And what that is are these extra layers that float on top. They aren't actually stitched down, but because you see this so much on rainwear, here we see it on this raincoat that's down here also, and notice how in the front it comes down to a V here and it buttons in place with an extra button that's put there. And there's another one in the back. And this one also comes down to a V. Sometimes you see them with a pleat right in the center so that they pleat back and forth as they go around. But these are there not only for a kind of a smart military look, but also they're there for that extra protection, as I said. So let's see how easy it is to do those extra layers if you want to add those to a pattern that was not really intended to be rainwear in the first place. We could add it to this one very nicely, and it would just be a matter of looking in the mirror and dropping a tape measure down to decide, first of all, how long it's going to be. So if I drop this tape measure down my back, I would probably find that, wherever it ends up, down here seems good, somewhere above my waist, I would end up with about 15 inches extra I'd need there to come from the center back down to as far as I want it to be. So that's a matter of marking it here on the pattern, and as I pin this pattern down to my fabric, I would just mark it right here where it's going to end up, and it is above the waistline. Okay, I would just mark it there, and I would cut out this much of it around up the back. Well, this is going to be on the fold, of course, so I wouldn't cut there. I would just put it on the edge of the fold of the fabric, but I would cut around the neck and down the shoulder and down the arm's eye until I'm somewhere about at this level where I want it to be. And then you would pick your pattern up and just cut whatever line you want there at the bottom. So this is kind of a good way to do it. Another way, I don't want to really cut apart this pattern because I am going to use it again and don't want to have it in pieces that would need to be taped together. Another way might be to trace a duplicate of this. I have them on colored paper here just so that you can see it more easily. Here is a back, so I'll turn it over the way you usually see backs. And maybe we want to have some sort of a different little design there, such as, instead of being cut straight across, maybe we want this instead to come, down about here. This would be approximately the waistline right here. So if I want it to come down that far, but I want it to come to some sort of a curve, or maybe like the front of the raincoat, the red raincoat, which came down like this. If I wanted it to come like that, then possibly I would go ahead and make a duplicate and cut this out. That isn't too difficult. You could cut that just by lifting the bottom part of the pattern up. But also, if you want to make a duplicate, this is how to do it. Now sometimes, not only does this come down in different shapes, but there is perhaps a pleat at the center back. The easiest way to do a pleat there at that center back is not to cut a whole pattern that has the pleat on it. It would be much easier to instead just manipulate your fabric that way. For instance, this is not rainwear fabric, it's just a nice cotton floral. But for example, if I wanted to have a pleat here at the back, instead of putting this pattern now right at the center back fold of the fabric here, I just move it over, decide how much fabric you want in that pleat. And the pleat might be about this much folded in. So I would just fold over this fabric or else cut it this way, either way. Cut it around here, and then before I start stitching it to the coat, I would simply pleat this in until it's the size of the original pattern. So that's a very easy thing to do. Here's what I would mean. After I have it cut out, I would pleat that to the center until it shaped out the very same as this neckline on the pattern, and then I would know I had it just right, press it in place, and then forget the pleats there and just go ahead and stay stitch across the top and sew it together. What you also need to do on any of these double layers is hem them under first before you sew them to your coat. This one is hemmed under, and I see this fabric is coated on the back side, which is also very common with the raincoat fabrics. So it doesn't show, it looks pretty on the outside, it just looks like a cotton, but on the inside it has this coating to protect you. Well, this one has a hem folded up, and you must do that first. Do all those hems that are extra in the floating layers that are not attached. Do the hemming first, and then you simply stay stitch around the rest of the area to get it to work as one with the piece, the pattern piece, the fabric that's behind it. So a very easy addition to make. Sometimes there are very dramatic ones on the front side instead of being cut just to a little V. Sometimes they're cut into an asymmetrical type design, which is nice to have. And if I'm going to do that, I probably would put two pieces together of the front and just tape them together and then cut out whatever my design is. Here's where the buttons are going to be eventually, down the front here. But perhaps right now I want that design to come from under this arm and come over here and button into something. Maybe this will be a big button right here. So this is why you might have two pattern fronts traced and use them together so that you could tape them and put them all in one piece to cut your floating layer that you'll have there. So very easy to change these patterns and do whatever you want them to do. It's very rare that you can look through all those brands of fabric or patterns and find exactly what you want. So if you can just find something kind of close to it and then make whatever changes are appropriate for your needs, for your wants, that's probably the easiest way to go instead of trying to get all conditions exactly right, which is very difficult to do. Well, this one also has the epaulets then and whatever other little features you want to add to it. A belt, if you want to add a belt, if it's not already a tie coat, a belt is not too difficult. You simply measure how long it is to get around your waist by putting the tape measure around it and seeing. I'm not actually going to show you how big my waist is. I'm just going to tie it and you'll have no idea then. And if this is how long you want those tails to hang, then fine, 60 inches is what you're going to need for that belt. So decide just by whatever way is most practical how you're going to do that addition that you make. Another addition that we might make, I talked about last time, and what that was a hood. Last program we had an anorak. It was a different pattern than this one, but here was the pattern for it. Here was the hood off last week's design, and it's nice to transpose these between different patterns. This pattern that I have, the jacket that I have shown here today, already has its hood on it, so it didn't need one. But if it did need a hood, I'll try to get it back up here again. If it did need a hood, if it didn't have its own pattern for it, here's how you would decide if you could just use this hood from a different pattern for this particular pattern. You'd put the shoulders together. I'm going to overlap the front and back shoulders, make sure that the neck edges are together and the sleeve edges are together, and with them right together this way, take your tape measure and put it on end and actually measure from center front to center back, right on the stitching line, not on the outside cutting line, but right on the stitching line. Measure that and see what it measures all the way around to the center front. This one measures 11 inches. So then I would measure my other pattern that I'm going to borrow a piece from and see if it also measures 11 inches. Well, 11 is what I want, so I'll put it right here and see what happens at the stitching line. And I'm not lucky enough to have that happen. Well, it's nothing too tragic. Here's where the center back is. What I would do, since it doesn't quite fit the neckline of this, is simply add. There isn't any really crucial fitting on a hood, therefore it wouldn't matter just exactly how this is shaped. The easiest way for me to do this would simply be to add. As I had that measured, it needed a very little bit. I'll put a piece of colored paper under so that you can see. As I had this measured from the 11 mark around to here, I see that I needed, yes, about 3 extra inches. So the easiest way is to pin a piece of paper to this and draw out that extra 3 inches so that it's going in a straight line. And then somewhere here, just taper into the original hood, and it would work out just beautifully. You wouldn't have any problem with it. So it's this easy to transpose pattern pieces, whether it's a collar, a hood, whatever it might be. But I also said last time I thought we ought to use that hood for something else, and that's not only for rainwear, that's maybe to extend the season a little bit. So what I've used that hood for is this. Possibly, if you saw my first series, you remember an upside-down jeans vest that I made? So there were the jeans, and I made it into an upside-down vest. Well, there were legs that had to be cut off that to make it a vest. Where the legs went was into this hood. Now, this is a purchased jacket. I did not make this jacket, but here are the legs for my old jeans jacket, and I have used this hood from the pattern that I showed you last week. I have used that pattern to make this hood, and this is a fun thing to do, to add like this, because it does extend the season. Even though this jeans jacket is not meant to be worn in cold weather, if you have a sweater under it and have this warm hood on your head, perhaps you can wear it an extra month or so, or a little bit more at least. So with this hood, what I would like to show you, there it is, the very same pattern. And this cuff that I have right here, of course, was not on the original pattern. The reason it's there is because as I used the legs of those jeans, that is where there was a seam in the jeans. So I just used it to my advantage, and I put this extra piece, as I cut off the two legs and used both of them, I just made sure that that seam matched when they came together at the top of your head, and so it looks sort of like a fold-back cuff on each of them. Anyway, let's see how that works out, because this can be a problem. Anytime you stitch on denim, it's a good idea to use a denim needle, because there are special ones that you can buy that just work for denim. And what they are is very tough needles. They are not going to break easily, because if you use a fine needle on denim, it's going to break. This is really tough fabric, and that's one of the features we like so much about denim. But where it presents a problem is when you get to these big, heavy seams. So I'm just going to stitch over this and show you how you can do this easily. What I'm using as a top stitching thread here is a beige. It's actually a top stitching thread, but it's beige. I always have looked at jeans and thought, well, that's an orange thread there. It's not. It's beige, it turns out, because this matches almost completely. So I would try to, as I do some stitching on this, I would try to match that same stitch that's there, and that means get it into something a little bit bigger than what was there originally. Well, here's where the problem comes with denim. When you come up to this big heavy layer, because you have here about 4 layers here, another layer down there, and you have a problem skipping stitches when you get to it or breaking a needle, here's what you might want to do to make it easier. I'm going to stitch right up to this lump, and when I get up to the lump, I'll stop, and I'm going to raise the presser foot. And I'm sure that you had something like this that comes with your machine, and what it is to put under a button so that you can sew a button on machine and have a shank with it. Use this also for such techniques as this. I'm going to just put this right up to that lump, that heavy seam, so that I can support the presser foot so that it's up in the air a little bit, and with it up in the air it will then just stitch right over this heavy lump and not give me any problems. And when I get to the other side, I'll stop again, and I'll put the foot over on this side to do the same thing so that I can stitch away from it. Now, if you have thought that possibly you'd like to make one of the fake fur coats, the faux furs that we see so much, but you don't know for sure, this might be a good place to test it out to see if you do or not. This is some knit, kind of a sheepskin look, but it's a knit fabric, it's a fake fur, and this was just a good test to see whether I wanted to make a fur coat or not. I found that it was very easy to work with. There are no special precautions to take. After I had the seams all sewn in, then you might have to, right at the seams, kind of brush it out where some of the fur kind of goes in there. Do some of that. You might trim out some of the extra and do what you can to make it as flat as possible so that it works out easily. Well, the title of this show is Come Rain or Come Shine. And where is it shining? In the Southwest. And I just wanted to give you a really quick tip. Here on this southwestern fabric, I had a very awkward place. You always want to spot things. If there are big patterns, you always want to spot them in graceful places. This was not graceful. Right here at the bust, I had this, this square that just really stood out and that really looked terrible. There is no reason why you can't. If you need to embellish it in some way, there's no reason why you can't. Just use a little bit of other fabric, fuse it in place on top, and change the look of it completely. Well, some find a lovely walk in the rain quite romantic, but I'm not one of them. I really won't have to find out how much downpour that rain jacket will take to soak through, because when it gets that wet outside, I'll be inside near a cozy fireplace, wrapped in something soft and warm like a sweater. Come join me next time and we'll do some sweatering.